I'm Mossy again. You're probably sick of listening to me at this stage, but Denise is going to help me out with this session. So Denise is hugely experienced just in terms of digital communications and metrics and measurement around those things. So between us, we're going to try and make this as interactive as possible. And so what we were hoping to cover off in this session is, rather than us standing up top here and kind of preaching about best practice and everything else, it's really actually just to go around the group and hear a little bit about maybe the different things that people are doing from a metrics perspective, what's working well, what isn't, and really to share, from the group in terms of learning from each other. So to frame that, I said where I started off, so we've built this thing called the value continuum. And really the idea with this is to try and look at the whole spectrum in terms of what communicators actually do today from a measurement perspective, from the really simple right through to the really sophisticated. So starting maybe at the bottom here, we're talking about things like nice to have, and that's really like your, I suppose, basic things, likes, comments, that kind of thing, right through to need to have. So these are more comms efficiency type indicators, where you have your opens, your clicks, your page views, your visits, attendees in an event, file downloads, that kind of thing. Right on through to must-have metrics, which is probably more akin to what we were talking about earlier. You have kind of performance versus objectives, where you're saying, well, look, this is what we were trying to achieve. We were trying to raise awareness, understanding by this much, the intention to act, new ideas generated for an initiative, that kind of thing. Right the way through to critical or business impact. So that's the kind of thing, like increasing revenues, reducing staff turnover, improving business performance. So, at this end, you probably have the Holy Grail, really, in terms of how comms is trying to really impact the performance of the business right the way through. And there's a bit of a maturity model going on here, right? I mean, you have to do these things almost to progress each step of the way. It's not like you can start at this end. So I thought what might be interesting is actually to go around the room and to get a show of hands from people about who thinks that they fall into which bucket in terms of where you're at with your measurement today. And it's really just to try and get a sense of the levels of measurement, or where people are at in their measurement journey. Because generally we find, we ran this in London, for instance, last year, and actually over half the people, I was shocked at this, admitted to not measuring at all. They weren't even on the spectrum. So, yeah, it fell off the edge. So we probably need a category for that too. But so actually that was quite interesting, because there was a lot of people in there kind of going, well, we're new to this, we're only starting out, we don't even know where to start, that's why we're here. So it'd be interesting, maybe if we could start off here in terms of who feels they're maybe in the nice to have bucket in terms of what they're doing today. I mean, can we get a show of hands? Very good. What about those who feel they're maybe in the need to have bucket in terms of what they're actually doing? Okay, a lot more hands.
You should say that was 30.
And then the must-have bucket. Where do people feel? Anyone feel that they're in that category? This is kind of linking it to your strategic objectives. Okay, very good. And anybody in this critical business impact Holy Grail type bucket over here on the right-hand side? Okay, that's good to hear. Excellent. So you can see there right the way around the room, most people probably in here, that'd be fair to say. And okay, so you're not alone. Okay, so let's talk about actually what works well in each bracket, right? So if you start off, and the reason I have this up here like this, the open rates are just the beginning, is, obviously we believe email metrics are very important, but they're kind of like a proxy for awareness, and a good place to start in terms of, just getting a sense of actually how are my communications performing. So, I mean, we heard some good stuff from some of the other presenters here today about how, they can use email data for saying no to certain requests, reducing overload, that kind of thing. Interestingly, and we need to get this updated in our software. I don't know how many here actually benchmark their email performance, or have some sense of look at the benchmarks in our app, or get a sense of that. So we need to update those figures in terms of the metric. But the most recent research that we've done on the benchmarks is, so for open rates, it's around 63% open rate is kind of the benchmark average, and click rate, it's about 12%. But you kind of need to take those in context, right? Because often when talking with people, we hear things like, well, I only got a 30% open rate on my email. But actually, that may be for the type of email that it was or the type of communication you're doing. And then it was like, well, I got 90% on another thing. Well, how many people did you send it to? Well, it was 50 people, and it was a really targeted thing. So these, I suppose, in terms of, it'd be interesting maybe just to see if anybody wants to volunteer in terms of what they use from an email perspective, in terms of what they find most helpful. Is it the open rates? Is it click rate? Click rate it's a good one. It's almost like a proxy for intention to act, or the call through, or any other things that people are doing in terms of their email reporting. So anybody feeling brave in terms of sharing their experience that they do on the email side?
We actually use the click rate versus the open rate because we use Outlook, and a lot of people use that reading pane.
Okay.
And the reading pane throws off the numbers.
It can do, yeah. So you focus more on click rate as the key metric. Yeah. Okay. And so typically, do you adjust the type of emails that you create then to try and drive more clicks? Because a lot of communicators, if it's for information versus for action, for instance.
Right. We do. We try to put some kind of incentive for people to click, rather than just having that little bit of information on the front screen. Sometimes that's all you've got. But to try to get them to go to the microsite for the deeper story, or to even go from the microsite somewhere else.
Okay. Any particular tactics you've found to be effective in terms of actually getting people to click through?
Anything that actually affects them, like they need to go enroll for open enrollment, or people love our discounts to go, reroute where they can, save money. And any kind of story where we talk about other coworkers doing good deeds, things like that, where they can support their colleagues.
Okay, they're really good examples. Anybody else doing anything like that, or things that they find, ways they use the email metrics? Maybe things like looking at the breakdown by employee data, department, the time of day that they send it, anything like that? Anyone else?
We found, so we use Poppulo to send out a weekly newsletter and our monthly newsletter, and we found that depending on the time of day, we get a higher open rate than, so if we send out our newsletter in the morning, it gets a way higher open rate than it would if we sent it out at 4 p.m. Kind of the same with the time of the week too. If it's kind of the middle of the week, it's a higher open rate rather than the end of the week. As long as it goes on.
Okay.
Is your audience all in the same time zone?
Yes.
Well, that's really interesting. So we did a piece of research maybe a year or two ago. We probably need to update it, but we looked at the best times and the best open, the time that got the best open rates. I think it was around between 9 and 10 on Tuesday mornings, interestingly, that actually seemed to, across our client base, get the best. And then Friday afternoons between, I think, 2 and 4 was the worst. And then unsurprisingly, we have a lot of customers who send on Friday afternoons.
You know why that is?
Pardon?
You know why that is?
Go on, give me your theory.
It's not a theory. You've gone through it and you've finally got sign off and everything. You get it out just before everyone leaves for the week.
Yeah. How does that resonate with people here?
Yeah?
Yeah?
I know that sign off pain. Not in this company.
Yeah. But interestingly then, that actually has a big impact on the performance of the email.
Yeah, we have a Friday comm that we send out, but it literally, by hour, it goes down. So 9 o'clock is 1, 10 it's down, 11 it's down. I mean, it just progresses down hour by hour. So we still do pretty well in the morning.
Okay.
Has
And
everyone
it's-
sent one on weekends?
and it's
Maybe
expected.
Sunday before people come in on Monday?
Yeah, so anyway,
I've seen that work well.
we can watch it go
Yeah.
down.
Well, that is a good point, though. There's a lot of research actually that shows most of the activity on an email in terms of will happen within the first 3 hours of sending it.
Yeah.
And thereafter, it pretty much, you're really into tiny incremental activity thereafter. So look, I wouldn't use that as a hard and fast rule. You guys need to understand, your own business and when things are happening. But generally, mornings tend to do a little bit better in a business setting. Obviously, then actually, when it's not even internal communications, there's a lot of research that shows that weekends for marketing stuff it does better. So it depends. You need to try and understand that in your own business. Okay. Anything else on the email side of things? Anyone else have any other examples they want to share, things they found to be particularly effective, or how they've used the data to better understand the performance of their emails?
Just curious if anyone's doing resends based on the stats, dealing with the non-opens.
Yeah, Mossy, the benchmarking document you referenced earlier about the different open rates for time of day and also by different areas of the market. Us being in manufacturing, I use that 70% open rate a lot when I talk to different clients within the internal sphere. Just to use that as, if I send them an analyst that says, hey, you got 73% open rate, their natural instinct is, why wasn't it 100%? This isn't good. But being able to tell a story about, hey, 70% is the average, you actually are doing well above that, et cetera, is very helpful. Is it on the radar to possibly update that in the future?
Yes.
It's actually in the works right now. So we will be publishing something probably in October, certainly in the next couple of weeks, with updated benchmarks and new information around this. So our
Yeah, we're
data
gonna
analyst
use
is
that
actually
to-
doing that research.
We'll use that to update the infograph.
Yes.
So if anyone wants to contact me at dcox@poppulo.com, I'll make sure that you get it. You're on our list, but make sure we send it out as soon as it comes out.
You were going to jump in
Sure.
there?
Do you have different benchmarks by business sector?
We do.
Yeah.
So we, as part of that exercise, we're actually looking at it by industry. So we should be able to share that with you as well. So we are at a point now where we can start to understand these benchmarks by vertical or industry and by company size. And we do actually see differences quite considerable in some instances between the different ones. So for instance, often we'll see higher open rates in knowledge workers or financial services, that kind of thing, obviously where people are more desk orientated and it's more of an email culture versus maybe manufacturing or organizations with kind of large field workforces. So we will share that as part of that research. That is something that we're looking at. Okay. So that's on the email kind of open and click side of things. So the next topic that I want to maybe just cover off a little bit is on the content side of things, right? So I suppose what we mean by this here is that, if you're producing a lot of content, which I'm sure you all are, it's critical to understand, well, how is that content performing? Has it landed? Which content works well with which audience, which channel, what time, that kind of thing. So, we see, I suppose, the customers that get the best results here, they're very interested in looking at kind of going, well, rather than using the same content strategy for all employees and all audiences across all channels, they're trying to look into the data to see actually are there different mediums, channels, writing styles, that work for the different areas of the business. So how many people here, maybe get a show of hands, would actually use the same content strategy for all employees versus maybe who tailor it based on the audience that they're targeting? Can we maybe get a show of hands? I mean, generally, do people send the same content out to everyone or do they tailor it for the audience? So who sends the same content maybe out for all audiences? Okay. And do others tailor it based on? And where you've done that, have you found differences in terms of maybe the results that it gets or the impact that it has? So could you give us an example maybe where you do this in terms of how you tailor it based on the different audiences?
One way we tailor is, and I work in healthcare, so we have different constituents. Our medical group is one of our constituents, and our managers are another group that we tailor content to. So a lot of it is how you present it, and a lot of it is also just trying to make the content relevant to them. For the medical group, that's especially important because they don't want content unless it's relevant to them. They don't, they really perceive that as, in their way of doing their job. So it's just
Noise, basically.
Right, and our managers, really we tailor that content to need to know and what do we expect you to share. So it might be the same content that we're using in other ways, but the message there is you need to share this. So the medical group, I think, is probably the one where we tailor the most, and we have moved the needle on that, and by adapting different ways to handle that content specific to them, and it has helped with some of our strategic goals around that group too. So
that's a really good example. I mean, I think these are things that a lot of communicators intuitively know, that if you tailor the content for the audience, that the results are likely to improve. But unless you're actually using the data to verify that, it's very hard to tell whether that's actually the case. So I suppose there's a lot of things that, hunch-based would seem to be a good idea. But again, unless you're actually using the data behind it, then you're not really going to know. And I suppose our customers that we see actually getting the best open rates and click rates, and even some of our clients now we see getting the best engagement rates with their content on their intranets, are the ones that are actually going, well, look, actually, this content, what's the best way of targeting and segmenting this based on the audience? And that really does give a substantial lift. Anybody else have any examples, maybe just in terms of looking at how their content is performing? I mean, do people tend to look at it on an individual channel basis, or do you guys look at it across things in the sense that, well, actually, I need to tailor the content. I write it one way for email, another way for the intranet, maybe another way for a mobile app or for a social network. Anyone have any examples maybe of how they tailor the content based on the channel? All very shy. Well, the reason I asked that question, guys, is just, again, I suppose we analyze this quite a lot, and where we see people actually getting the best results are the people who actually tailor the content for the medium. So rather than sending the same thing out to everyone, they actually, in a lot of instances, will tailor the content and rewrite it based on the channel that they're using. Okay, so this is a topic we talked about earlier, and I suppose it's helping communicators maybe move beyond that delivery or tactical perception inside their organizations, and not being perceived maybe as simply a mailing office, but actually being perceived more of maybe a strategic function inside your organizations. So again, this refers back to a lot of what we were talking about earlier, is that the percentage of what you do that is just sending out stuff because that's what you're asked to do, versus the percentage of what you do that is linked to a key goal, strategic initiative, or a campaign. So maybe we could go around the room just trying to get a sense of maybe the percentage of comms that you send out that you feel is actually more just kind of ad hoc and reactive stuff versus the pre-planned or the more strategic or campaign-based stuff. So could we maybe get a show of hands who finds that they're sending maybe more ad hoc or kind of business as usual, the majority of it being ad hoc or business as usual type stuff versus maybe high value campaign or strategic related stuff? Does that make sense? You know, just get a sense.
We do. I mean, I think are probably the communications that are more planned and strategized are probably more HR stuff because it's your girl. But everything else is very reactive.
Okay. Would that be reflective of other people's experience? A lot of things coming. And so how do people, you know, how do you deal with that? Does anybody ever use data to actually combat when you're asked for a lot of these last minute requests or things that you're asked to send something out and I'm not sure we should send this out. I don't think this needs to go all employees. Have we any data to show actually this didn't work the last time? Why would we do this again? Has anyone any examples? I mean, Lindsay gave a good example of that earlier when we were talking about it, and we've seen a number of other clients use that very effectively. Does anyone else do that here, where you're asked for to send out this thing at the last minute, and you're like, I don't think this needs to go to everyone. Anybody use data in that way? So I think again, this is probably a very effective way of using data to move really from this delivery mindset to more a value added or a high value one, where if you start to track everything that you're doing, and then you can use precedent or previous data that you have. So we have a lot of customers who essentially have told us that they've end up sending less email as a result of using our tool, because they look at the previous email stats to go, we did that for you last year, it got a terrible result, we're not doing it again this year. And so that actually starting to use the data in this fashion starts to transition you from being more delivery oriented to being more strategic in terms of how you use it. So this is kind of what I was referring to earlier in terms of, again, the metrics that matter is moving beyond maybe hygiene metrics like the opens and clicks to the more performance or performance against goals metrics. So what we're talking about here really is, rather than looking simply at maybe open rates and click rates, looking at, well, what was the goal that we were trying to achieve and how did we perform against that goal? So do you ever find in terms of the reporting that you're doing that if you're trying to relate this up the chain, maybe to some of your senior executives and things like that, they're like, well, so what does that tell us if you're maybe just coming to them with page views or some of the other kind of more hygiene factors that you have in your channels? Is anybody, I'm getting a nodding head there, is that something you've found challenges with?
Yeah, I think it goes partly to the benchmark piece, right? Like, okay, so what does 73% mean? Is that good? Is that bad? And then the challenge we have is that's one piece of the very big puzzle, right? We don't have that cross-channel information. We just have email address.
Okay.
And so they've clicked a link, does that mean they actually took action on what we're asking them to do? They just probably got to the back page, or our internet in our case.
Yeah,
Did
and
they take the one step further? We don't know. We get lost.
I think that's a very good example. It's really about context as well. I think, rather than just going, we got these figures, actually, what does this mean? What were we trying to achieve? What did we get in terms of the awareness? Did we actually change behavior, understanding our attitudes by doing that? Has anybody else had that challenge? Maybe when you've started measuring, you think you're doing a great job, you're getting a lot of metrics, you have a good bit of data, and then you try and present it to their people, and they're like, well, so what? What does this actually tell us? Anyone have any examples maybe of how they've overcome that or changed, to transition from maybe just reporting on the hygiene metrics to actually get to the next stage in terms of where they're actually using the data to say, well, we got this level of awareness, but actually we, achieved this goal or moved beyond and actually change behaviors?
I haven't quite done that, but I find with my leaders, like I get the same thing, like what, is that a good score or a bad score? And then I quickly have to go to like the color commentary and reach out to people and find out like, what the perceptions are of the message coming back. So it doesn't get to your point about data, but it does get to like the qualitative view of the world, which I feel like our leaders are still looking for that. So.
Okay. And so there seems to be, there's, by the sounds of things, is there a big appetite for benchmarks inside your organizations to give you a frame of reference around which actually you can say, well, this is what good looks like, this is what average, and this is what poor looks like? And so outside of email, does anyone maybe have any examples of other types of benchmark that they've used, in terms of even things like survey data or benchmarking intranet performance, even things.
Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay. We've used correlation between Poppulo emails and traffic drivers to our intranet.
Right.
And we've built that up over 2 years now, and look at that as a benchmark and trends and see if it's going up or down and why. We try to dig a little bit deeper into the content. We do find that email is probably not surprisingly the #1 driver of traffic to our intranet. It is partly the way that we use it. We do a lot of digest-heavy type emails that are kind of short, words that go to a greater, broader story or article. But yeah, we like to look at that monthly and see how it compared to versus last year, versus last month, etc. Yeah.
Yeah, we do pretty much the same thing that you just said.
Okay.
And we look at our intranet site, we look at like open rates and click rates on student emails from the event portal as well, because we'll set up events for like our operating committee and town halls for our president, and look at the 40 different communications that went out from weekly emails to the invites to the reminders to register to follow-up emails to articles on the internet, and see how that whole entire campaign compared to like the last meeting, and then we'll make recommendations on
That's really
how
good.
to tweak things for the next time.
Okay. I think you've hit on a couple of important points there. One of the things that we're working on at the moment, which we're probably going to release to people shortly, is the concept of user journey on a campaign basis. It's something that's quite prevalent in the marketing world, where people are looking at the digital journey between channels and doing that on a campaign basis. And the more you do this, the more you can refer to the historic precedent, where we're starting to see people, we've kind of done this manually with a couple of customers, is to actually go, okay, well, this is what was required for a similar type campaign in the past, so that it can give you a sense to achieve a similar result in the future, what level of content or activity that you're going to have to put into that campaign. And so that you can start to get a sense, almost benchmarking the previous performance to plan the level of content or activity that you're going to need for future campaigns. You were going to just jump in with a point there.
Oh, yeah, one area of measurement that we are looking at is Yammer. We're actually trying to encourage digital usage of the cloud, whether it be Teams in Office 365 or use Yammer as a replacement for email. And so we use things like Poppulo very specifically and strategically. So I'll look at our Yammer metrics, who's creating groups. I'll pull case studies, who's using it for their project teams and things of that nature. So I actually want to look at email droppage within the company and look at Yammer using it as a tool for communication and for project management.
Okay, that's a good example. And just speaking on the social side of things, is anyone doing any form of sentiment analysis, that kind of thing on their social network just to see? So we have seen one or two clients who actually do that very effectively on the social side of things. It's, I think, probably a bit of a nascent area, but actually looking at the level of activity and the tone and nature of conversations and group activity. For instance, if they put something out on email on the internet, actually to look at the corresponding activity on the social channel to see, again, what knock-on impact one has on the other. So the next area just I wanted to touch on really is the whole level of understanding. And I suppose here it'd be good to hear what people are doing in terms of maybe more qualitative type activities. So we see people, they use, there's the annual comms or engagement surveys, right the way through to focus groups, in-depth interviews. And it'd be interesting to hear what people find most effective in this respect. I mean, we see a lot of people use surveys in conjunction with the emails in our tool to get very good results on that. Little straw polls are a very good way of measuring beyond opens and clicks. Actually, did people understand this message? Was it read and understood? What are people doing in terms of actually understanding type metrics or behavior? I mean, a lot of people still kind of doing the annual comms survey or annual, a couple of questions in the annual engagement survey for gauging this type of thing? Maybe if we could get a show of hands in terms of how many people are still using surveys quite extensively for actually measuring the performance of their communications. There are a lot of people
annual
still.
survey, is that what you mean?
Are a lot of people still using an annual communication survey to understand how they're doing?
So we are, but we've kind of adapted it to be more about understanding of our brand, of our internal brand. So
Right.
it's less about the communication, although there's a few channel questions and things like that we probe on, but it's really more about the understanding of our brand platform.
Okay.
Or brand positioning.
And that's something you run on an annual basis?
Yes.
And what about any others who maybe do annual type surveys, just in terms of measuring communications effectiveness?
So we actually had a long conversation at our last team meeting about putting a survey together and what it would get from us, and we actually decided to scrap the survey and do more kind of individual interviews and focus group type stuff, because what we thought was that we always ask the question, how do you want to be communicated to? And people always say email, but then they complain that they get too much email. So you can't ask that question effectively because they don't know what they want.
Maybe it's the type of emails, if you start asking them which ones they're receiving that are helpful. Are you asking which of the emails they actually find helpful when they say that?
We had asked that in the past, and so we found some valuable information there, but we felt like asking those same questions again was going to get us nowhere, so we decided to not spend the time on the survey.
That's interesting.
We did the same thing after several years of doing annual surveys. We just kept getting the same stuff back. And so we did nothing for a few years, and now just recently we just did some random self-select survey, but then followed up by focus groups and individual one-on-ones just to get a sense of the direction.
Yeah, you get more of a qualitative sense from.
Because we're in a position where we do our engagement survey, we're not allowed to add any comms questions to it. It's all about employee engagement,
Okay.
so not comms.
And anybody moving away maybe then from the big bang type surveys to doing more of a kind of polls or straw polls or short pulse surveys on a regular basis, where you're trying to get quick snapshot of how employee sentiment on a particular topic?
Yeah, I was going to say that we've added that as well. In addition to sort of shifting our annual to be more understanding based, we also are adding the spot polling throughout the year.
Yeah. And that's where we see a lot of clients getting very good traction with that type of approach, where it's short, snappy, very targeted around a particular instance, rather than this big bang approach once a year, where people, things that can affect that almost are like, what was the weather like on the day they were filling it out, as opposed to actually you ask about specific topics affecting them at the point of time in which it's most likely to affect them.
But Mossy, they were also saying earlier, I forget who it was, they take the surveys and they don't see anything happen from them. I think maybe it was Rob. It's like there was negative stuff that came out of it and wasn't dealt with.
Yeah. Okay, well look, guys, I suppose the last point here is almost, this is the Holy Grail where people are trying to get to the changes and outcomes. Did we increase, revenue or opportunities in the sales pipeline? Did we actually help improve health and safety, reduce accidents, that kind of thing? The one thing, and my boss will probably kill me for saying this, a lot of the time software isn't the answer to necessarily trying to measure some of these things. There's a lot of good material out there from the likes of Angela Sinicus where actually sometimes you need to look at, well, what was the business outcome or what was the objective, the goal that we were trying to achieve? And sometimes it might actually be manually measuring those things. It could be, I've seen actually some companies where on the factory floor they have things like at the airport where, they have the comms materials around the factory floor and people are indicating, on the smiley faces whether those things were effective and actually had the impact on them. It's counting the number of accidents that maybe happened and some of the communications that went on around this, and that can be done in a spreadsheet. So it's really, this is more of a methodology and asking, well, what business goal are we trying to achieve? And then working back from that to try and track the data that will give you an indication of whether the communications played a part in helping that. So maybe what I'll leave you with is just to think about this. So I suppose we work with hundreds of clients and we see lots of, we have a lot of benchmarking data and we're seeing more and more of the things that work and don't work on lots of different channels using surveys and lots of different things like that. So I would encourage you, when you're struggling to try and figure out how I'm going to measure this, is to reach out to us. So you all have your account manager these days and they're very, very knowledgeable. We want to encourage you to talk more to us in terms of what you're trying to achieve from a measurement perspective so that you can leverage our combined learnings. So that's something we would encourage you to come to us more and more for. And while the data may not always be in the reports in the app, and we're trying to address some of that, actually we're sitting on a veritable gold mine of kind of benchmarking information, and we're looking to try and get more of that into the app. But actually, if you're just looking for something, you're like, oh, it'd be really good if I could answer this, or this is the question that I'm trying to grapple with, do please feel free to ask us, because often we can actually go maybe mine that data or dig directly into a database to get it for you. So I'll leave you on that point. So thanks very much for participating. Hope you found that interesting, and enjoy the rest of the day.